Hey, everybody, welcome to Scottsdale Living. It's election season, right? So Scottsdale City Council, Scottsdale Mayor, up for election this year. I think we got 4 seats that are currently open. And right now we're talking with Mason Gates, running for City Council. Thanks for being here, bud. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. So, I mean, this is the big the big question that's going to come out, right? Is you're young, dude. So what's the motivation? How'd you get going down this path?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually was talking with a women's political group up north yesterday, and I was telling them, I've been involved in politics for nearly half my life at this point, which obviously very long time.
Yeah. Running the school council, or what do you mean?
So I worked on a number of political campaigns. I'm not originally, from Arizona, actually. Okay. I moved out here from Kansas City, Missouri. Sure. Which is honestly a big part of why I wanted to run. Mm-hmm. I moved here because I didn't like Kansas City, and I wanted to move to what I believe to be the greatest place in the world to live, which is Arizona. And so I moved out here and I've loved it ever since. I originally lived in Tempe and then I moved to Scottsdale. And, I'm focused on preserving the reason why I came out here, which is just the nature of this city. You walk around. I tell people this all the time. I mean, I have a really big appreciation for this city because I'm not from here. Sure. And so I tell people, especially my friends who come out here to visit, the air, it just tastes better out here. The water tastes better. Everything is better out here. And everywhere you walk, I mean, it's very, upbeat, right? So I walk around Old Town on the weekends trying to grab signatures and, you've got tons of people walking around just having a great time. And, that's a really big reason why I wanted to run. And, sure, I've got, a big background in politics working on campaigns, but the main reason is, I would say just wanting to preserve the reason why I moved out here. And also, I noticed that only one of the 7 current city council members lives in South Scottsdale. Yeah. And so I'm looking to represent really what I believe to be an underrepresented area. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're looking like Old Town and down. Yeah. It's kind of the constituents you're looking to really
even a little bit north of that. I mean, South Scottsdale is a big area, right? Yep. And a lot of the current city council lives pretty far north. And so, it's just something I really want to focus my campaign towards because I hear all the time from residents when I talk with them that they don't feel as though the council represents South Scottsdale very well. So
something that comes up all the time in every conversation we have is development versus maintaining what we have, right? So, I mean, I know there's obviously 2 or 3 sides in Scottsdale politics. I mean, there's old timers that they'd rather still see horses pull up to the front of buildings, right? And then there's some that really want to go forward and build everything. So what's your take on the development going on in Scottsdale?
Yeah, so our official position is inhibiting overdevelopment. Sure. That's what we want to stop is overdevelopment. Now, obviously, I have great respect for land rights, and I understand that. But the issue is overdevelopment is different from development. Mm-hmm. What we want is sustained growth. We want growth that makes sense for the city. When you ask, when you poll the exit poll for voters in Scottsdale, the number one issue to them most of the time is congestion. Yeah, totally. And so if we're going to approve every high density housing, proposition that comes before the council, then you just have a lot of, unhappy residents. And honestly, you're not representing the constituency very well because I have yet to hear, the vast majority of constituents are opposed to the massive developments that have been put before the council. Sure. And so, if you want to build within, the zoning rights and you want to build within your land rights, that's fine. Mm-hmm. The issue comes when a lot of these developers are pushing, projects that don't fall within that. Sure. And so that's something that we really want to focus on because obviously you can't just say that, we're never going to approve a development again. Yeah, that's how the world works, unfortunately. And it's a growing population and that is what it is. But my issue is the high density developments that a lot of these developers and zoning attorneys are pushing onto the city that constituents and residents as a whole just don't want.
Sure. So when you look at, everything that's going on, especially the startup field, right? So it seems like there's a lot of tech startup going on in Scottsdale. And a lot of times that requires development, that requires stuff going on. What's your take on how we should position Scottsdale in the future for not only, development, but for jobs, right? Because we want to keep a steady stream of jobs coming in.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So I would say, right now, a good amount of the employees who work in Scottsdale don't actually live in Scottsdale. Yeah. And I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. I think people are willing to drive here to work here because, you get paid more when you work here, right? The number one employer in Scottsdale is the food and beverage industry, right? And I would say, 3 times as many people work here than do live here.
Oh yeah, without a doubt, right?
Right. So the reason why is because, the clientele and the customers that come here are willing to spend more money. You're going to make more money as an employee. And so I think, right now where it's going, I think it's fine. We don't necessarily need to cater to any at all. I don't think that's, a necessity for a city. You look at cities that have done that previously. New York City is a great example. San Francisco, LA, right? These massively developed cities, overdeveloped cities, where there's crime, there's congestion, there is, a lot of homelessness, right? There's a lot of issues with the city. And, when you start catering to people, that's what happens. And it's inevitable. And so one of the things I really like about Scottsdale is they do not cater to everyone, right? It's, a lot of times you have to have money to live here. And, it's one of those things where it's, it's sad, but at the same time,
is what it is,
that's what makes Scottsdale so great. And that's what makes Scottsdale a popular destination, right? I'm from Kansas City. I don't see bachelorette parties coming to Kansas City, so that's my main, kind of path, I would say. Yeah.
So let's twist kind of into that, right? So one of the biggest thorn in the side, I think, of the residents of Scottsdale is STRs. So the short-term rental industry kind of taken over, especially Old Town. There's so many of them. And I know the state has a lot of their control in that, and they don't give a lot of control to the city level. But what's your take on it, and how do you kind of appease the constituents of people that live here to stop that?
Yeah. So from what I've heard, and honestly, I'd love to look more into the policies. Just right now, my campaign has been focused on getting the signatures. It's quite an undertaking.
That's a hard one, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. 1,000 signatures sounds a lot easier than it actually is. I've learned. Totally. But I would say, from what I've heard, Sedona recently enacted a good plan that's combated the short-term rentals pretty well. I also know in Lake Tahoe, they do something where you can't even purchase a home unless you live there 6 months and a day out of the year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there's a lot of different types of restrictions that you can put into place. I personally am opposed to them. I think, if we're going to do short-term rentals, I'd like to see a minimum of a 30-day stay. Because you actually have stake in it at that point as a tenant, right? Whereas with a short-term rental, if you're there for 3 or 4 days, why should you care how your neighbors feel about you? You have no stake in it.
See the waste management open, right?
Exactly. And the thing is, right, like, people are trying to raise families here. And, you don't want a new person in the house next door to you every day throwing a party. And I understand where these families are coming from, and I'm in the same boat as them, right? It is a very touristy town, but at the same time, you can't, alienate your residents. These are the people who are actually paying taxes, property taxes, right? Like, they're here for the long run. And so I think we need to cater more towards them than anyone else.
So what do you see as the downfalls of the current city council? So you look at the last 4-year run or 2-year, where have they missed out on, and where would you like to see improvement go?
Yeah, so the majority of the current city council is pro-development. They might say that they're not, and a lot of them actually ran on platforms that said they weren't. And then, you look at their voting records and it doesn't line up, right? There's really only 1 or 2, council members who have voted no almost entirely on all the developments. And that's Barry Graham and Kathy Littlefield. And so my issue is, given the fact that I'm out here talking with residents, voters, right? I'm hearing them say, we don't want more, overdevelopment. We don't want road diets. We don't want these things. And then I'm seeing the council inadvertently vote for all of those things. And to me, it's just like, it's not that hard to know what residents in Scottsdale want. I'm out there talking with voters every single day, and this is exactly what they're telling me. And then I look around, and again, I see the council voting for it all, and it just confuses me. So that's something that I really would like to change. But I think the biggest thing that I'd like to bring to the table is, I have a background in commercial real estate, and I don't do any brokerage in the state of Arizona. All of my brokerage is done remotely. That being said, I do have the knowledge, the experience, the fortitude to really speak to these issues and really know what is and isn't a good development. And so I think that's going to be an important perspective to bring to the table, because right now I think a lot of the council has to consult with, people who are involved rather than just knowing stuff like that on their own. So
sure. What's your take on campaign financing, right? So that's a question that's popped up. And, even at a local race at like the City of Scottsdale level, there's a lot of money that comes into that, So what's your take on how that functions and how that rolls? Yeah.
So one of the other candidates who's running, Jan DeBoscus, she actually reached out to me, I think it was probably a month ago or so, and asked me if I'd be willing to sign a pledge that would say I'm not willing to take any money from really anyone, but particularly developers who we expect to have business before, or the council expects to have business before. And I was, all in to sign it, but a lot of the other candidates weren't. And, to me, the way I look at that is, people aren't willing to set aside their own, desires and wants and what they're really trying to gain out of being a councilman for the City of Scottsdale. Me personally, I don't really have anything to lose from this, right? This is not my career. This is not what I want to do with my life, right? So I'm not dependent on this for income, and it's not why I'm doing it. Sure. But I think a lot of the other people are doing it for all the wrong reasons, which is, again, another reason why I tossed my hat in the ring. I would say I think we have a decent amount of transparency, I'd say. I mean, you can obviously look at who's donating to whose campaign. Sure. But, I see the financial filings, and I see, who's donating to these campaigns. And for me, it's tough to understand how we even allow council members to accept money from developers who are literally putting propositions in front of the council. Right. So I think that's an issue. I don't even think that should be allowed. I mean, you can call it what you want. To me, that's a bribe. Sure. That's a bribe to me. And it doesn't get more simple than that. So that's where I'm at on that situation. But yeah, you won't see me taking any money from developers. It's not something I'm looking to make a habit of. Right now, almost the entirety of my campaign has been self-funded. And outside of that, I've had family, friends, and then some residents as well who've been willing to donate. But my focus right now hasn't even been trying to fundraise, right? Yeah, I'm trying to connect with voters. I'm trying to get signatures. Right. That's my focus. And then we can worry about that stuff later. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be sitting down with developers begging them for their money. That's the last thing I need. Sure. So circling back a little bit to development, because it's a tough subject, right? I mean, we're a city that doesn't have a ton of land left. I mean, we've been developed pretty full. We got some space up north a little bit. But, you look at a place like maybe Mesa. Mesa will approve more projects in a week than Scottsdale will in a year. Right. I mean, how do you balance that development? Obviously stay within, what the land use was there for in the first place, but still bring in, whether it's new condos or it's new business or whatever. How do you look at that? I mean, what's the process you want to go through for that? Yes. So, I mean, pretty much anything that is, within the intended use of the land rights, whatever, I mean, that's going to get approved on its own. You don't need the council's approval for that. But when they go to council and they're begging for, we want to build more apartments than this allows us to, or we want to do this or that, you do need to look at it. You can't just say no. Sure. But I mean, you're going to notice that I will say no to a lot of those developments. And the reason why is because I actually care what the constituency of Scottsdale wants. Sure. And, what they want is they don't want overdevelopment. And in my opinion, I mean, you have organizations like the Coalition of Greater Scottsdale who are fighting to preserve the intended use of land. And then, all the while, you have the same thing. You're hearing the same sentiment from residents in Scottsdale. And then you have the council voting for every development. So obviously, I can't. I'd like to be informed on everything before I make a decision. Sure. Right. I think that's important. But you're going to notice that I will vote no on most of the development propositions that are put in front of the council. So what do you think the top 3 things are facing the city of Scottsdale in the upcoming, let's say 4 to 6 years? Yeah. So I would say number 1 is going to be traffic, congestion, et cetera. Number 2 is, the overdevelopment. And this is in no particular order. Sure. And then the third is going to be homelessness. Yeah. And the reason why is, and honestly, the first 2 are connected greatly. I mean, I even gave a public comment at a couple council meetings ago where I talked about how the same council members who are approving road diets, which is essentially the repainting of roads to allow for bike lanes in exchange for traffic lanes, are also approving high density, developments. Sure. And so it's like, at some point you got to ask, what's happening here? Why are we doing this? This is completely counterintuitive. And if Scottsdale voters' number 1 issue that they're concerned about is congestion, then we need to focus on limiting that and not increasing it. Sure. And you can talk about, bike lanes are great. Mayor Ortega, his direct quote, I think, was, it gives you a sense of place, whatever the hell that means. But what I can tell you is bike lanes are used by 1% of the population for 7 months out of the year. Yeah. This is one of the hottest places to live in the world during the summer. And it's, I mean, I can't imagine, people are riding their bikes around for fun, in the middle of July. And maybe some are, but again, you have to ask about the usage and what the sacrifice is. And given the fact that, like I said earlier, a good majority of people who work here don't live here. Right. What that tells me is that those roads are very necessary for commuters. Mm-hmm. And I think it's something we need to keep, especially given the fact that the road system here was developed, predominantly post-World War II. Sure. Which means that it was developed for the automobile. And so why would we destroy a system that was catered towards the current, mode of transportation just to allow for bike riders? Again, a lot of which don't live in Scottsdale, right? Some of them are snowbirds, right? Sure. And some of them, aren't exactly working, might be retired students, whatever. And I'm not saying I don't care about those people. It's just we have to ask, what is the most beneficial for the city? And I think at the end of the day, it's keeping those roads how they are and preserving what we have. And like I said at the beginning of this, I'm focused on preservation. Sure. So when you talk about, I just said something at the top of my head I want to throw out there, but I kind of lost it for a second. Give me a second to circle back around. So let's talk about housing, right? Affordable housing is where I wanted to go. So if you're a teacher or a police officer, or a fireman, whatever in the city, it's kind of hard to live here, right? Yeah. I mean, you can't really afford to do it. What's your take? Should there be an affordable housing aspect to the city? Or is it just, that's the nature of Scottsdale? It just costs a lot of money to live here. That's a good question. And honestly, that's the first time I've been asked a question like that. So I don't know how I would approach that per se quite yet. What I will say is I think, if we can have some form of, it's a possibility that we do that. But at the same time, I don't want to be seeking federal funding for that. Sure. And the reason why is because federal funding, they actually brought this up at one of the council meetings. It requires you to pretty much allow any and all to live there. You can't, basically say, oh, just these people can live here, just those. And so if you seek federal funding, then you're allowing any and all, and you're letting people who don't already live in Scottsdale to come live here. Sure. And, I think Ortega was saying something about how, well, now they become residents. It's like, yeah, that's exactly the problem. Like, again, this is still an exclusive community, and it's tough to live here, and it is expensive. But again, that's what makes people pay thousands of dollars to come here for 3-4 days out of the year. Sure. But no, I'm not like, I greatly respect our first responders, law enforcement officers, et cetera. And I would love for them to be able to live here. So, if there is a way to do that, I'm open to pursuing that. Sure. But, again, that's the first time I've been asked about that. So I'd like to look into it a little bit more and do some more research. Appreciate that. Yeah. So let's touch on the third one that you brought up was homelessness. So, it's increasing across the United States. It's kind of rampant, right? So how do you address it and approach it, especially in Scottsdale? We're seeing more and more at the intersections, at the highway intersections, especially. What's an approach to take there? Yeah. So, it's funny that this issue comes up a lot and people always talk about how bad it is. And it's definitely not good. But I come from an area where I've seen it get really bad, right? Kansas City, Missouri, homelessness there is comparatively a lot worse than it is here. And so, I don't think it's quite bad yet. But I think if we keep the status quo, it's going to get bad. Sure. And the status quo is essentially just taking taxpayer dollars, housing them in hotels commingled with paying guests, and telling them that they don't have to be sober if they don't want to. Now, I have an issue with this because I think it's a gross misuse of taxpayer dollars. I think if you thoroughly explained what the council was doing with taxpayer dollars, which is the housing first policy, I think the majority of the city would oppose that idea. Sure. I think if we reallocate funds more towards making mental health, rehabilitation centers, et cetera, accessible to those people, I think that's going to greatly start to fix the issue. Homelessness is a tough thing because you can't just say, oh, we're going to fix it. Like this is how we fix it. There's no like black and white to it. But I think the status quo is the worst thing I've ever heard ever. It's just like, you're basically just throwing money at an issue and hoping it pans out. And on top of that, you have to remember, again, this is a city that's heavily reliant on tourism. Yeah, totally. Which means if you're housing homeless people with those people, Like, let me ask you, like, if you're going to a city and your next door neighbor at the hotel is doing meth, right? Or like doing drugs.
Probably not a positive,
Right. Like, that's not going to make you want to come back there, right? Sure. And so, and I'm not saying every homeless person does meth, but, you know, if you're saying that sobriety is voluntary, in my opinion, you're just enabling them and you're giving them a place to do it. And, you know, I think it's a really big mental health issue more than anything. And so if we can start allocating funds towards something that is actually beneficial to that population, that might start to fix the issue. But right now, I don't think it's fixing anything.
Yeah, it is. It's a tough one, right? I don't know that there's a solution offhand, but there's definitely something that needs to be done. So Scottsdale historically, well, especially the last 10 or 12 years, been a really kind of green focused community. I mean, does that fit into your game plan, into your campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think sustainability is important. You know, it's not like the forefront of my campaign, but I'm not going to be like against it by any means. You know, I want to live here forever, so I have no intentions of changing or trying to make us deplete all our resources or anything like that. The other thing I really like is we do have, you know, great parks. Like I was at Chaparral Park yesterday.
The green space is great, right?
Yeah, very, very nice to walk around and just enjoy. And, you know, I think a lot of Scottsdale residents like that. So yeah, I mean, I'd be focused on definitely preserving that and ensuring that we do have long-term sustainability, you know, plans set up. I think they've done a pretty good job. The council's done a pretty good job. I'll give them props for that. With you know, putting that as a, you know, main issue. But yeah, no, it's definitely not something I'm going to ignore.
Yeah, totally. So what do you think about the overall water situation? I mean, we were kind of a national news source for a bit with the Rio Verde thing in the water between the city of Scottsdale. How do you see that playing out in the future? And what do you think about water in general, in Scottsdale especially?
Yeah, I would say, you know, Scottsdale, you know, it is its city, right? I mean, we are Scottsdale. And we don't necessarily need to cater to really any residents who don't live in Scottsdale, right? So we don't need to, you know, beg, or Phoenix doesn't, you know, basically cater to us per se, and Tempe doesn't cater to us. And so why should we cater to anybody else, right? I mean, I'm focused on Scottsdale first, right? And residents first. And so I think we need to make sure that we're set up long-term before we do anything to help anybody, any other surrounding cities.
Right.
Because this is Scottsdale City Council that I'm running for, not, you know, I'm not running for the governorship of Arizona. So my focus would be on first ensuring Scottsdale's secured, and then we can worry about the rest.
I love it. So let's switch over to a personal level a little bit. What's some of your favorite things to do in the city? Like, give me your favorite restaurant.
Okay, favorite restaurant.
That's a tough one.
There's so many good ones.
I know, right?
Ooh. I would say, gosh, it's not like specific to Scottsdale. I love Ocean 44.
Oh, yeah.
That place is great, but I want to think of like a little bit more niche.
Yeah. There's so many, right?
I know. I love stopping by Postino.
Yeah.
It's a fun one to just kind of hang out at. I have a lot of meetings there pretty frequently.
Sure.
It's a great place to go. They have a great selection. Oh, gosh, this is a tough question. I'm going to have to think about this for a second.
Well, we'll let you off the hook.
Yeah.
I mean, so kind of wrap it up for us. Give everybody, you know, your pitch and what you're doing and how to get a hold of you especially.
Yeah, certainly. So my name is Mason Gates, running for Scottsdale City Council. You know, if you want to check out our website, you can do it at votegates.com or gatesforscottsdale.com. You can donate there. You can check out what we're all about. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. My email is votegates@gmail.com. I will respond to you directly. We also are on social media at votegates on pretty much every platform. And, you know, if you do want to sign our petition, help me get my name on the ballot. It would mean more then you know. And you can do that at sign the number 4 and then mason.com.
Love it. Mason Gates, running for Scottsdale City Council. Appreciate you being here, man. And best of luck, bud. I'm excited for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.